Let's just let it go away.
There you are.
I want to, when you're done, I want to pull up this presentation folder.
It should be. If it's not, I have my computer and I can just
No,
slide
I'm almost certain. I'm going to pause the. Okay, and then Anna, you're good.
Yeah, and I can just stand there while it's on.
And we're shared. Yeah.
People are just throwing on their own, so we don't have to admit them. So.
Good energy.
I think the last session had a lot of bodies.
There's a lot of hot air blowing in.
There's like, I don't know where they do. I'm wondering if that's. Well, I think there's.
To see how it affects.
I mean, I'm not opposed to opening the window or the blinds. Yeah, I feel a slight breeze. I think the leaves are like.
Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started here. It's past 25 after. Hi, my name is Trevor Cottle, and I'm a board member of Wright, Illinois from Springfield, and I'll be your moderator for this session. And this session is called The Paths to Top 5 Bicycle-Friendly State, for, of course, our state in Illinois. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our sponsors again, Keating Law Offices, Freeman, Cavendice, Law Firm, Epstein, IDOT, Civil Tech, Play Designscapes, and I would say Vail. So I'll say Vail. Now, to get to the main meat, I want to introduce our speakers first in the order in which they're going to present today. We'll probably hold the questions until after they've presented. So we'll have time for questions. Okay, first off, Anna Tang. She is from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and is the Bicycle Friendly America's program specialist with the League of American Bicyclists. Anna is certified league cycling instructor and a member of Bike Pittsburgh, and a board member of Friends of the Riverfront, a local trail stewardship and advocacy group. She travels extensively promoting and advocating to make biking more accessible, approachable, and enjoyable to everyone, everywhere. We also have Dave Simmons. He's from Elk Grove Court, or Elk Grove Village, Illinois. After 25 years in educational publishing, he has been the executive director of Wright, Illinois for the past 3 years. As you expect, he is steeped in the bike advocacy culture. In addition to leading the state biking advocacy organization, he is president of Friends of Cycling in Elk Grove and a committee member of the Northwest Municipal Conference Bicycle and Pedestrian Committee. Dave is also a league cycling instructor where he is deeply involved in bicycle safety and education. And then finally, we have Cynthia Hoyle. And she is from right here in Champaign. And, oh, in Urbana, sorry. My mistake. From Urbana. Cynthia is a planning consultant specializing in active transportation, traffic calming, which she wrote a book about. I looked up that book and it is expensive.
I know, it's like
$900.
you can get it cheaper.
Okay, good. I was wondering about that.
Some people think it's worth a lot of money, which is sort of silly.
She has other projects that emphasize human-powered means of travel, especially safe routes to school. Cynthia is currently serving as president of Ride Illinois, and she is also a league cycling instructor. Cynthia in recent months was elected to the National Board of Directors for the Sierra Club representing Illinois. So without further ado, Anna, she'll be talking about how the bicycle-friendly state is calculated and what Illinois trend is.
So I just want to know who works for a DOT? One person. Who's an advocate in the room? Couple, most of you? Nice. Well, that helps me to know who I'm talking to. And thank you so much for coming. It's not every day you get a DOT person at a bike summit. So that
He's a captive
nice.
audience.
Okay. This year or like in the past? Okay. Cool. So we'll touch on that in a minute. I did want to do a land acknowledgement just to start off. This is a video. I'm not going to show it because I think it will take a little too long, but as you can see, you know, I got this from the university and I wanted to make sure that I started off on the right foot by acknowledging the land that we're on and the people who came before us. So the bicycle friendly state overview. So this program started in 2008, which is a relatively new program for the league. It is a ranking of all 50 states. We do not do DC since it is not a state. It's not optional, so we do it regardless of whether a state wants it or not, because it is a ranking. It promotes awareness, best practices for states to do, and departments of transportation and legislature to follow. You've been silent. So we also, you know, and there's a lot of guidances. So our evaluation criteria is based off of feedback, you know, which we send to the DOT and they provide the answers for us. We also evaluate on 5 bicycle friendly actions, which is the complete streets, the safe passing law, the statewide bike plan, bicycle safety emphasis areas, and where the federal funding is being spent. We want to make sure that it's at least 2% or more is on biking and walking. And then federal data indicators. So right here, you can see the infrastructure and funding, kind of like our 5 E's: education and encouragement, traffic lanes and practices, policy, program, evaluation, and planning. So since we began in 2008, you can see where Illinois has ranked over time. While you are number 15 out of all 50 states, within the region itself, within the Midwest, you are number 3 out of 13, which is pretty good. I do think you know, there's room for improvement, which we'll go over here in a minute. But I know this is like really hard to read, so I wanted to give people a second if you wanted to pull it up on your phone or your computer so that you could actually see it. This is the link that you can go to read the report card. And all report cards, past, present, are on our website at this link. And you can find it as well as like different guides for a really in-depth view and analysis for going through every single line item on here. So that is something that if you want to, you can do it. So up here, you can see that the funding score is particularly depressed because while the state legislature has allocated funding to biking and walking, the representatives from the DOT who filled out the BFS survey never reported any state funding for biking and walking. So that can definitely be improved upon. You know, any amount will give you a higher score there of reporting, and it explains your ranking in that section. We also noticed that the bike plan is from 2014 and we recommend creating a new one. But while we recommend that, we also weren't sure what progress had been made on the one that was put out in 2014. So, you know, whatever, even if there has been something worked on, whatever's publicly available, we weren't able to tell from that. So that's why I put on there that it's unclear. And then Illinois, sorry, let me do this so you can read it.
You can minimize the
Oh.
people who are.
And then just drag it to the bottom.
Okay.
Very good.
Okay, so Illinois, you know, is one of the few states though that has had all of our bicycle friendly actions since they were adopted in 2015, which is great. And probably helps to get you to be number 3 in the Midwest. So the whole point is to like think about how can Illinois get into the top 5, which I think, being number 15 is extremely achievable, if not, within the next couple of cycles, very, very, very soon. Like, I don't think you have too far to go in order to get there or to be number 1 in the Midwest. But the things that all the top 5 have in common are strong history of promoting biking with their state legislatures and with their departments of transportation, as well as like leadership from the DOT, which is really important. Credibility for doing Vision Zero leadership or adopting a safe system approach, which, if you don't know what the safe system approach is, it is creating and designing streets that put a focus on having the design to be self-enforcing streets. So as you can read the rest of that on there. You're also pushing for the state of knowledge about biking and infrastructure planning forward. So you're not just keeping it at the status quo, you're really looking for ways that you can improve it and push what the state is working and doing. I think that these 4 examples of what's going on in Washington, Massachusetts, California, and Oregon are really good examples for like actions that other states are doing. So Washington has an active transportation plan that has really great data work behind it. And the DOT has done some of the big data. So it's available for the rest of the state to use for their advocacy or their planning, engineering, like whatever it is, their DOT has it. Massachusetts, which is the number 1 state right now, published a high impact separated bike lane design guidance, which is really useful. California removed the use of level of service from its development review and made vehicle miles traveled generated a new metric for review. That's, that is a standout. Oregon, also a standout, was one of the first to make 20 miles per hour their streets widespread as their standard. So like thinking about, like how survivability from a crash at different miles per hour, having 20 is just like an incredible pass for a state. And then finally, the other thing that all top 5 bicycle friendly states have in common is they have iterated on complete streets at the Department of Transportation level through policy, technical assistance, and quick builds. So like if you're able to demonstrate it, the community is able to understand and be educated on what that kind of things are. If you have technical assistance, then for the communities that don't have the resources, they're able to get that guidance on how to implement it. And if you have the policy, then you have the law to follow and back you up on the decisions that you're making. So for this one, I just put in these 2 things that say like what Illinois can do to work on to get into the top 5. And I honestly think that, just getting the DOT to be stronger and make stronger reforms on actions around biking and walking, and, not being afraid to be the leaders for the state to set the standards, is really going to have a strong impact for all the communities. I know from just talking to a couple of people, it's very like Chicago minded here. Like a lot of people feel like everything's focused on Chicago, but the rest of the state is extremely large, and there are so many communities out there that need that leadership, and they need these policies and guidances so that they can implement it and change their standards and look to the new design guidelines and ways of doing things so that they are following it from the top down. And also being able to pass some sort of Vision Zero or a safe system approach. Not only is the FHWA deeming this the standard now to have the safe system approach, but when you are able to rally around something like Vision Zero and like all the complete street kind of language and policies, you begin to design streets that work for all road users, not just people who are biking and walking, but drivers, ambulances, fire trucks, like whoever is out there using the road, you are designing with safety in mind. And this in here in the state leadership for safe streets, I highly recommend people look at this because it gives specific asks that you can ask for your governor, for your legislators, for your mayors, for all the people who are working, who you want to talk to, who can help pass this kind of stuff. We have a guide in here, and this is the link for it. I know it's really long. The slides will be shared later, but you can also just find it on our website. If you go to our Bicycle Friendly America and then click on the states link, you can find it there. So I wanted to point it out as an extremely useful resource. And then this is also like an example project that you could work on. I'm pretty sure most people in this room or at the summit probably know about overruling this precedent. Is it pronounced Bulb? Bulb? Bulb. Okay.
Actually, the last session in this room.
Okay, great. So, this is something that you could work on that like would have a direct impact. So great example because it's actually being worked on. And that's it for me. So I'll turn it over to the next presenter.
Share anything about that briefly?
Yeah, just very quickly, very timely. There is a appellate court case where a cyclist in Chicago crashed actually in the crosswalk. The crosswalk was near a divvy station. And the law in Illinois is that municipality is only responsible for like a pothole, some kind of defect, if it's an area where the bicycle is both not only permitted, but also intended. When we had to show intent, typically with there's a bike lane, there's a sign, share the road, a bike map, things of that nature. What was interesting about this case, the trial court dismissed the case. They said, hey, you're not even supposed to be in this crosswalk, there's no bike lane, whatever. The appellate court said, no, because it's near a divvy station where obviously people have to ride to and from to utilize parking or getting a bike out of the corral, bikes are both permitted and intended because of that. This obviously based on the first district appellate court ruling opens up any place where a municipality puts a bike rack, like share, any kind of signage, anything on a map. It really, really expands things. The Illinois Supreme Court is now accepted what's called a writ of certiorari, we call it a writ of cert, which is that they are going to hear the city of Chicago's appeal of the appeal. It's good. We have an opportunity here. I will say this isn't really the case that we wanted. Crosswalk, there's stuff that's kind of funky about it. We really would rather have somebody in a bike lane with a marked lane. So we'll have to see how that goes, but it's an opportunity. We're going to seize upon the opportunity. We're going to do the best we can.
I wanted to say one thing about that too, which I forgot to mention earlier, and I also forget the statistic, but maybe Dave or somebody, like how many people or households in the state don't have access to a vehicle? Does anybody?
It varies from one community to the other, and I have only looked at that here in my neighborhood. But
yeah, I know like nationally, it's about like 8 or 10% of people don't have access to a vehicle, and so when you see these rules that are like this, it like this, the whole point of like giving people options and creating policies that welcome people on bikes. It's not just because elite cyclists are out there and they want a bicycle friendly state or place to ride. It's because there literally are people who this is their only way of getting around. This is how they can get around. And so when there's rulings like this, or leadership doesn't welcome that this kind of method of getting around, it really like de-dignifies how people get around, and it doesn't allow them to get around safely. It really prevents that and creates a culture that's unwelcoming.
Can you find that? Like down this road?
It's on the census. It's in the census.
11%.
Census tracts.
11% of Illinois households do not have access.
11,
1 in 10. Yep.
That's pretty big.
yeah.
1 in 10, and that's like households. So if you think of households like in the population, times a household by 4 on average,
And that's statewide.
that's
Right.
statewide.
So if you went into urban centers,
Yeah.
Right.
not just
It's
Chicago, but you go to Aurora, you go to Champaign, you go to Peoria, downstate, where there's also high levels of poverty, you probably see that.
Exactly. Yeah, so
You can ask your city planning department. They'll have that data.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, right.
Chicago 27.
Okay.
Well, but DOT has more access. Right, right. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. Thank you, Mike. And please interject. The folks that I know in this room are very knowledgeable. So some of this is going to be a little bit of repeat of what Anna shared, of course, with the Illinois focus, but also if you have ideas and suggestions and things that you know are happening you want to share, please interject. I stole Trevor's laptop, so we can't follow the chat because I am just technologically challenged today. But we want to talk about the road to the top 5. What I learned from Anna, we spent quality time together yesterday, right? In talking about the program, Bicycle Friendly State program, talking about Illinois in particular, we have some fairly easy wins, right? As far as moving up the charts. So at 15, not bad. Our moonshot goal is to crack that top 5, right? The idea behind a moonshot is to aim high, right? And to stretch our work and our, the ideas that we convey. So we'll hit the top 10 and we'll shoot for the top 5 and maybe be number 1 someday. Massachusetts, when you look back several years, was in the low teens, kind of right where we are at. So it's certainly possible. Anna brought up the report card for Illinois. And so these are the categories. The beauty of the Bicycle Friendly State program is it's been going on for about a decade. Anna showed where Illinois, like we've ebbed and flowed, I think is as high as 8, as low as 20, 22, right? So it's at least it's a lens that we can look through that's been consistently measured based on available data. See, this is some of the things I learned from you, Anna. It's not perfect, it's not all encompassing, but it's a way to measure progress. And compare, yes. And so, yeah, look at Illinois, right? We've got a few things we're not doing so well on. And I should mention, Steve is with IDOT as the bike pedestrian ADA policy engineer. Did I get that right? Yeah, and Steve's relatively. Okay, yes, we got the only one here. Yeah. But to Steve's credit, we've talked quite a bit, right? Steve rides a bike, he drives a car, he's got young family, he's involved in McLean County Wheelers. Like, to have Steve in the role he's in is a real win for all of us. So I don't want to put you on the spot, and I know we're gonna ding IDOT a bit, but constructively. Just know that we have someone within IDOT who we can work with and who's been open to suggestions on policy and other things. So the fact that we rated low on infrastructure, right, and on planning, these are some things that are areas of opportunity. Okay. When it comes to the traffic laws and practices, an A is great. Could we have a 5-foot passing or 4-foot passing law? Like, could we improve upon the established laws? Why not? And because we can look at these other states and what's happening in other areas of the country or the Midwest, we have almost a roadmap of where we can focus our efforts. I briefly mentioned last night, we had our Ride Illinois board meeting, and we talked a lot about within our organization setting goals, whether they're policy goals, whether they are membership goals, right? But so we as an organization are focused, and that's to come. So whether we work within the confines of Bicycle Friendly State or some other means of measuring our own success, we're going to have a clearer picture about what Ride Illinois or the Ride Illinois board feels is important in the future. So we'll take a look at a couple examples. Anna mentioned Massachusetts. Massachusetts? Who ever thought, like, was that the first state that popped to your mind? My examples are down here. So I'm going to look down here for just a second. Some of the things that stood out on Massachusetts' report card. 0.9% of commuters travel by bike. That's 5th out of 50 states. 0.9 still seems rather small, room for improvement, but Massachusetts has increased their share, their mode share when it comes to biking. They also had a legislation called the Municipal Modernization Act of 2016. And what does this do? It allows municipalities to establish regulatory speed limits on locally owned roadways lower than the statutory speed limit. And that has been discussed, right, Illinois with active trans, metropolitan planning. I refer to it as this coalition where we're having these discussions. So is that something? Can we lower it to 20 or 25? Massachusetts did it. And as a result, their ranking improved. So just, you know, a couple examples there. One other one, who would have thought Florida, right? What do you hear about Florida?
Land of 6, 12 lane roads. No sidewalks.
Right. But look, okay. Yeah, and that is one thing, right? So they're number 8 based on the latest measurement. But they are also 45th out of 50, not in a good way when it comes to fatalities.
Yep.
So we were discussing whether or not that was weighted heavily enough, and you know that can be a debate for another time. But what they have done, they've done a commendable job in investing federal funds into walking and biking projects. Okay, so again, room for improvement. They strengthened their driver education about bicycling and walking safety. I want to share an example of, reality of the Illinois Secretary of State and our driver's ed program, right? The test you take to get your driver's license. It's our understanding that there are 8 questions out of a pool of 400 that pertain to biking and walking. There's only a guarantee that one will come up for each test. We asked the Secretary of State, the current Secretary of State, what can be done to increase that? And the answer we were given was nothing. Because we don't want to, they saw Ride Illinois or Bicyclists as a special interest. So Florida, they've got a pool in their pool, 25 questions pertaining to bicyclists, and many of those show up on their tests. So room for improvement, quite a bit of room here, right? We want to get this information into people's hands, into their heads, right? So things when they see someone riding a bike and they're driving, that their behavior is different. So it's, yeah, Florida. A lot of people are dying on Florida roads, which of course is terrible, but they are doing some things moving in the right direction. So I figured we'd have just a couple examples from around the country. And then in the Midwest, Anna mentioned Illinois is number 3 out of 15. You know, most of us, if we got 10 out of 13 right on a test, we did pretty well. Michigan is number 11. What do you think of when you think of Michigan? Many people. Cars. Well, all right, Cynthia. Well, Cynthia's the exception. Right?
Thank you.
They have beautiful trails. But yes. Yeah, right. That alone lofted them up in a couple spots. But yeah, people that get cars. And so how is Michigan? Number 2 in the Midwest, number 11. They created a statewide bicycle pedestrian count program. So now they've got data that they can measure year over year, or maybe it's quarter over quarter, right? Season over season. That was one thing that they were lauded for. And then they're also known for bicycling innovation. They've got, it's called the PEAC. And they've got programs such as Adaptive MOGO, which innovates auto safety to improve the safety of people walking and biking. Anna, could you briefly mention the grant with GM of all companies?
Yeah, so my position is currently funded through General Motors, the car company, and through that, I was hired to do bicycle-friendly community workshops, 2 of which were in Michigan, Flint, and Grand Rapids. But there was also Spark grants that we launched this year, which was giving like mini grants to a bunch of different communities. A bunch went to Michigan as well, but yeah, and next year we're trying to double it. So hopefully go to 10 communities to work on creating more bicycle friendly communities.
Funded by GM.
Yeah, so car companies,
Right.
do have in their philanthropy lens, the lens of looking at safe streets, the lens of looking at micromobility and electrifying their vehicles, and what the future is looking like since, you know, e-bikes are outpacing car sales and just that kind of look.
Thank you.
Mhm.
And I think the example, we'll talk about it a bit at the lunchtime session too. This is not us versus them. How many people in this room drive a car? All right. Yeah, so we all do. So from an advocacy, from a messaging standpoint, the pool is much larger. If we focus too much, we can kind of get lost in the weeds. So because GM is doing things and there's things happening in Michigan, a very auto-centric state, it's a good example of what can be done in Illinois. And then lastly, Minnesota. And I think Minnesota has been, I think most people think Minnesota is bike friendly, right? Like, what are those crazy people up north? Not that much further north, but they are, right? And it's yeah, they got winter weather and more extremes, but they're doing it. Right, Illinois, we've been fortunate to work a bit with the Bike MN or Bike Minnesota. That's their statewide advocacy organization. And they've done some really cool things over the years in terms of education, in terms of just getting the word out around the state with partner organizations. So definitely lessons that Right Illinois can learn, but having you all involved then just amplifies any efforts and messages. So what have they done? They've got something called the Next Generation Energy Act, which requires the state to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by 2050, increasing investments in non-emitting modes of transportation like biking and walking, and reducing or increasing the scrutiny of projects that increase motor vehicle capacity. And then they also have passed in 2021, it's a $7 billion transportation bill, and 5 billion, I'm sorry, million, not billion, 5 million was appropriated to active transportation, safe routes to schools, etc. So not that Illinois is not doing some things well, it's just because of this program and the fact we can look at these report cards and get a start of where we can go next. Speaking of what's next, so I mentioned some of the conversations that have been happening. As we kind of just categorized a few here, and these are, I would say, fodder for conversation. There's no commitment at this point, but we're talking about an e-bike incentive program in Illinois, specifically an incentive program versus a rebate program, because an incentive program will allow people the lower barrier of entry versus a rebate having you compensated. And this can work in small towns as well as big cities, because the big cities maybe people are using e-bikes already because they have them, or there's a bike share. Small towns, you can tap into fundings, and there's models from around the country where funding is available to have an e-bike lending library. So say a smaller community just wants to get funding for 5 e-bikes that they can use, right, and lend out to their folks. So Cynthia gave me that. She's good at that. We mentioned the driver's exam, and then allowing municipalities to reduce that statutory speed limit, which, as we know, higher speeds increases the severity of crashes. And then long term, I come from an education background, assessment and getting education. What if we had curriculum that we could hand to teachers and start the younger generations earlier in their understanding, looking at the complete streets policy, which was developed in 2007, and at the time was fairly progressive. That's an area of opportunity. And then Steve, we can talk about policy documents. And again, Steve has done some of this already, so we'll continue to push, right, to make some of those policy changes better for people outside of vehicle. Yeah, go
As
for
far
it.
as the MUTCD, it's required under the Infrastructure Job Act, IIJA. It has to be published May 15th. That's the federal one. And then you can back off that to update hours. Design manuals, guidance. I'm on the AASHTO committee for non-motorized, and we're publishing our second version of the bike design guide.
Yeah.
Yay.
We're hoping for next year. Get that right. But when we do, that's a, of course, what we will adopt.
Right. And then it takes time for implementation, right? I mean, I think we all get that. Yes.
I think even like bike education in schools could be like more of a short term. At least like introducing it and then
Yeah.
like getting that.
It is, yeah, and we actually have a mini grant program which reaches about 52,000 students last year, which is just tip of the iceberg, but you're right. So let's get that to more, and then in the meantime, develop that curriculum which teachers rely on, right? We can hand it over. Good point. Thank you, Steve. Thank you for your question. Cynthia, I think we're turning things over to you
Yes.
right now, so, and I'll check and see if there's, Trevor, you can check the chat.
Yeah, I will say that Illinois has over $1 million in their Safe Routes to School non-infrastructure fund. And they are talking about using that to develop curriculum. Whatever has happened with that, I don't know. The reason I know is because they didn't allow people to apply for non-infrastructure grants in this last round of funding for Safe Routes to School, which I chair a program that's had a grant every year they've offered it. So I called them right away or emailed them, and they called me back and said, I knew we'd hear from you right away. What we want to do is use that funding to create curriculum. So he said they were going to pull together a committee to begin working on, but I have not heard anything about that. So it might be something to inquire about internally to see where we are with that. Anyway, these are some of the barriers that those of us out here in the fields of Illinois have seen as barriers to moving up. And it's changing design standards, which has already been discussed, but particularly even in communities like Urbana, where we are a gold bicycle friendly community, we have still an emphasis in looking at the safety of motorized vehicles taking priority over bicyclists and pedestrians sometimes in our streetway design and our analysis. And so changing that mindset, I think, is just incremental and ongoing in looking at how we design our roadways and update our standards. We also have to talk about what we're measuring. Level of service for vehicles is not what we should be measuring on our roads to identify how to improve safety. Improving safety for drivers is important, but we need to be looking at the safety of the pedestrians and the bicyclists. And that's somewhat harder to quantify, but there are ways in which we know we can make it safer for everybody, whether or not we have a lot of crashes there right now or not, but specifically focusing on fatal and injury crashes as a metric rather than what we call Class C crashes, which is just damage to vehicles. And this comes up, by the way, because my son was hit by a driver on his skateboard. He called me and he said, the police asked whether or not they should give her a ticket. Should I insist on giving her a ticket? And she'd stopped. She was freaked out, and because she ran over his skateboard after he jumped off. And I said, no, you don't have to give her a ticket. And of course, I got in the car and drove over there. He's 29, but moms never get over being moms. Right. And so I pulled up and they said, who's this? But I said, that's my mom. And so what you find out is, first of all, if there's not, what is the level for damage? How much vehicular damage? $1,200 of damage to a vehicle. It's not, yeah, it's not automatically recorded into our crash data.
So it didn't happen.
And so he said, the police officer said, can I just file such and so a report instead of, the other report? And I said, well, will it appear in our crash data? And he said, no. And I said, well, I would like to have it in the crash data because we know there are many more crashes occurring than are being reported, because how many people are riding a bike that's worth more than $1,500? It gets crunched. So unless there's an injury, or significant, on a car, you can just bump into anything and have $1,500 worth of damage to your vehicle. So we get a lot of data about vehicle crashes, but we don't get as much about others. The reason law enforcement officers don't like to do that is it took a lot of time for him to put the data in on that crash report. And so they will ask people that question and people have no idea. That means the crash won't get reported into the data. So changing our metrics, figuring out ways to get all of that crash data, and integrating micromobility and new technologies. There's this tendency, we don't like change, we don't like new things. So there's this whole thing going on with people freaking out about e-bikes and scooters and, oh my God, people are going to get killed. Well, people are already getting killed. They're getting killed in cars. That's where most people get killed. And so why don't we talk about that? Where the real problem is, let's figure out how to make it safe for people to use this. It's an equity issue. People without cars need access to this in order to get where they need to go. And to truly implement complete streets design, it's not that easy. Urbana still has a lot of work to do on that, even though we adopted a policy a long time ago. And we'll talk about some of that a little bit more. We know how to do this, by the way. These are pictures. It's not something, it's not rocket science. We know how to do it. And these are ways in which we can do it, even on main arterial streets in major metropolitan areas. This is Stockholm, Sweden. This is the road that runs in front of the train station. It's a major arterial. This is what they've done with the street to make it safer for everybody. And to create safe places for people. Turn a street into something else for the summer. Give people space. This is in Paris. They've taken this street along the riverfront. And in the summer, it's this whole nother thing. And people all along this, there are all kinds of restaurants and activities and games, and people sit under umbrellas and lounge chairs, and it was full of people. And so this is, people love these things, and that's what we need to find ways of doing. So, not to just pick on IDOT, because all of these levels of government have control over street design. So it's very complicated. It's often convoluted. And sometimes the average citizen trying to deal with this runs away screaming because it's really hard to influence. But we can do it. I was looking at this map last night of all the regions and then the districts, and I was like, oh man, this is, can be really confusing and overwhelming. But if you go and click on it close to where you live, you can identify where that office is. And I'm very pleased today. We have a great bike and ped engineer in our district office in Paris. And Bob is very helpful when we call him about an issue with the road design. He is very helpful with that. Of course, you've got metropolitan planning organizations to deal with and municipalities. I didn't put in here townships, by the way, because townships are also involved. Illinois has the distinction of having more units of government by several thousand of any other state in the country. And so that makes it pretty complicated. So here, because we're talking about the state, which is why IDOT is listed here, is we think that one of the things that we could do is have more input on street design, on projects that IDOT is doing, and how do we help facilitate that. There also recently was a requirement for streets to have a turning radius at the corners designed for semi trucks on all streets. That's an unnecessary feature because not all streets have much truck traffic. We should only have that on streets that trucks and buses need to be turning on. We also still have this use of the 85th percentile speed. Instead of setting the roadway speed to what we need it to be safe, we set it at what 85% of the drivers drive. So 85% of the drivers are speeding, then that's how the speed limit gets set if you're using that criteria. So that's the transportation engineering world. And also this focus on level of service for vehicles. So what effect does having a wide radius have? Look at this car, they're pulling right into the bike lane. They ignore they'll ignore the pedestrians because they're zooming around the corner. And a lot of our crashes, the fatal crashes for bicyclists and pedestrians are turning movements. So we should design the streets so that they are looking, they're not zooming around the corner. They have to slow down and look. So what can we do? Well, we need action at many levels. You here today, what you can do is to engage locally and regionally and at the state level. And there are ways to do that. We have what we call now regional action teams within Ride, Illinois. You can sign up for one of those. That connects you with other people, a sharing of information. One of the things that people on those teams asked for was they wanted somebody from IDOT. I think you were the person they were talking about. Come to talk to us more about how things work so that they can understand the processes and engage with the process earlier. One of the problems in communities is that advocates show up at the last minute and say, well, we don't like this.
Right.
Well, guess what? We've been working on this for 10 years, too late. You have to be involved up front. And so how do you do that? And how can we help people understand how to do that? We need organizations to be involved. Bike clubs need to speak up. And I hear a lot of times, people say they're in a bike club. Well, I don't want to be involved in politics. Well, it doesn't matter whether you want to be involved in politics or not, you are involved in politics. End of discussion, because the roads that you are biking on are designed based on criteria and legislation and in the enablement of our DOT. So you are involved in politics. You are engaged in it every day. And so why shouldn't you engage in it in a way that improves safety and ability for you to bicycle? And businesses, it's good for business. Every place that you look, communities and states that are bicycle friendly are more prosperous. And so it's good for everybody. The other thing I wanted to talk about is something I think we can do at all those levels of government is more innovative design. And so some states, at the state of Washington, has implemented this DOT level. They call it an interim design strategy. And the city of Boulder does it, and the city of Seattle does it. And so what they do is set up a pilot project. It's usually paint that's temporary. There are other features you've seen. This is what we often in the planning world call tactical urbanism. Google it, you'll see all kinds of fun stuff that people do. This is one of those kinds of experiments. And it's temporary, and you can do before and after analysis. The community gets an opportunity to see how it works and give you input. And in Boulder, they have a whole formal process for giving input. They put them in for a year or two, and they analyze it in all kinds of ways. And then at the end, they decide whether it's going to be permanent or not. This is a before and after study. Which place would you rather be? And this is the process I pulled from NACTO. They have a whole section on this. And it's about how you do conventional project development and how you can do interim design strategy. And so this is where, all we have to do is add in interim installation, impacts analysis, and then design. The other good thing about this sort of a process is that you don't get to the end of it and have it blow up. Because one of the things you do not want to do is have spent time and effort, put it in, and then kapowie, the whole mob shows up at city council and screams and yells, and they tell you to take out whatever infrastructure you put in. So it's really important. And yesterday, Strong Towns, he talked about doing it this way, that it really has, and then you can also adjust it based on how well it's working and what the public has to say about it. So this is what it's about. It's about how we as communities welcome and support everybody. And so we're asking you to join us in working on that. And that's what I have. And we have 2 minutes for questions. So how do we want to do that? We've got some room questions. Yes, Tim.
This question is for Anna. Anna, thank you for coming. And there's a lot of us in this room, I think, that are trying to Illinois up that list. I'd say the thing that is of most interest to me is the funding one, because I think that's something where we definitely struggle as a state. There are non-federal funding sources that I know that a lot of people in the state have access to, but it's not state designated. So I was wondering, for those that are doing it well, are you aware of states and how much or what kind of state designated funding they have set aside? So we can kind of move to a model for.
I mean, like, honestly, I would just point to like the top 5 states, like Minnesota always stands out, Colorado always stands out for doing that kind of stuff. I think those are the top 2 that I would recommend looking at, Oregon.
And it's
A
a
little
state
bit.
designated funding source that they have set aside.
I
Want to dig into their
Yeah.
report card, but what are you actually setting aside and how much?
Departments of Health in some
Yeah.
states do
Like-
this work.
Yeah, like Minnesota has SHIP, their state health improvement program, and they do a lot of the bike funding and like getting the funds and then distributing it.
Got it.
I just also wanted to add, compared to Illinois, look at the recent infrastructure funding that was passed, and then to get a really precise answer, you actually have to go into FY the current year budget, because outside of those allocations, Illinois, certain representatives, state senators have had projects. There's also allocations there.
Yeah.
And that's just actually true. So there are really 2 places to look in Illinois, is who's getting what, which raises the bigger question, what is your rep or your state senator to every piece of the pie?
Yeah.
You were right that we are very Chicago focused. So Cook County were to get its own report card, there is their own dedicated funding, so I was trying to emulate what we're doing well, and can we elevate that
To the state, yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of that is like the regional work, like what's the NPO doing, what is on the chip for that area, and then who is the NPO? Who is putting the request into the chip and like really following it, like, you know, like when it comes to like states, I think a lot of like following the trail of money is where you're gonna find a lot of your. And then who's the decision
Well,
maker?
we're over schedule a little bit. I'm gonna do one more question, Marcus.
So from a planning standpoint, NUTCD versus ASHTO versus NACTO.
Well, they're not versus.
Well,
Sounds like a Thursday question.
Go ahead.
well,
MUTCD is required,
okay,
federal requirement of everybody in the land.
right,
ASHTO is guidance, NACTO is guidance.
okay. The interim design standards are NACTO?
Yes.
Okay, so and is IDOT okay with NACTO?
We have incorporated NACTO
Yes.
as reference.
Yes.
Therefore, partially,
Yes.
That
yes.
was my,
But as applies to turning radii, which is a legislative issue,
That-
that IDOT control
Yeah.
issue.
So that has to be addressed legislatively. Well, I don't know how it got in there without any of us noticing, but we need to, I suspect the trucking industry for that one, and I would bet money on that. The other thing that I was gonna say, oh my gosh, I was gonna say something to help you out with that in terms of the design standards. But it just blew out of my
I
brain.
would say read them. I know it sounds like
Yeah.
really time consuming, but
yeah,
the more you educate yourself, the better of an advocate you can be, and the more you can talk the language. of-
it's more about what's allowed to be used, like. does the
Right.
Municipality have to not NACTO or ASHTO, or can they just cherry pick?
It's
something?
referenced in our complete streets policy, I believe. So if you put in your complete streets policy to use the latest guidance from and then list the organizations, then you don't have to worry about updating it. Him and I've done a lot of complete streets.
This is beyond just copy and pasting, we're like, just go here, they're gonna keep updating it as they go.
Right,
So-
right. And I will say that Federal Highway Administration sort of has a
Yeah.
program in that, like, when they want to try a new design, like bike signals was the recent one. It's called experimental, and you have to apply to do it, and then you have to collect before and after data. And they use all of the data coming back from the communities to decide whether or not to make it a permanent feature. So at the federal level, they sort of have this, and I'm suggesting that we need to do that at state and local level.
Yeah, they have the bikeway selection guide, which
Yeah.
like helps you
Yeah.
choose and make like the trade-offs that you're gonna make for each facility.
Yeah.
You know, there's there's a billion manuals out there for everything, like there's guidances on curb usage and like how to get to the curb, whatever, but, those three that we just talked about are like, if you start there, then you can find the others.
So we have to stop. Thank you all so much
Yes,
for
thank
coming. And
Thank you, folks on Zoom. Appreciate you being here. We'll see you this afternoon.
Or other two chapters.
Yes.
Um,